So this is the setup, basically, for the 10.3 scenario, which is 1962. So now we're post 45 outside of the standard combat system generally. So a few changes, like the CRT is completely different for its breakaway from standard combat series, and the supply is also different in the sense there's no attrition on units. Well, that was like in the 45 ones too. It was just a DRM, because this game is quite short. It has nukes and chemical warfare options in here. The interesting thing about the CRT there is your odds are done by a roll to see the losses per the attacker per stack, and the defender rolls per unit, and then you roll on retreats. A lot more units here, or different types. You have Austrians, Italians, French, Belgians, Holland, Denmark is in play. And 62 is a strictly a Soviet attack, and 75 is also a strictly Soviet attack. So these two scenarios don't have a NATO option to fight back. The other uniqueness of this scenario is certain units have a little square box around it, and that's exclusively only to this scenario. Those units are never used again in the 75 or the 1983 and 9 scenarios. The interesting thing for all the Soviet victory conditions on the scenarios, 75 and 80, the 80s are a part of this. Whereas the NATO ones in the 80s are basically taking cities again, like Berlin, and to win victory. Whereas for the Soviets, they have a kind of a twofold victory conditions. Is you have to take West Berlin before you can start rolling for NATO collapse. And NATO collapse is you roll equal to or less than the victory conditions you have. And you can't roll on that until you take West Berlin. So that's your first thing you have to do. The options you have to do to get NATO to collapse before 10 turns is if they use a nuke or a chemical warfare attack before you do, it counts against them. You take the northern ports here, so you have to take that island there, Copenhagen, and then 6 of these 8 northern ports. And then once you do that, simultaneously that is added to your thing. The next option is to take Essen, basically the Ruhr here, control those 3 hexes, and then get 3 hexes across the western side of the Rhine River. So basically, looking at the strategy for their Soviets is basically stay on the northern half of the plain here, because you got to get these and just zoom down and take this Ruhr Valley and get across the Rhine. So basically the southern half of the map is kind of a backwater. strategically, other than tying down units to prevent just like walking units over along the road here and then coming across these bridges. But I mean, you can go through these gaps here and come down through nicer territory than try to fight through the mountains up here in Austria and the Sudetenland. So, and all these scenarios also have the run-up tension levels, which is in the optional rules. You can get rid of that, but we're going to do the tension track, and you move up units and see how it goes. So this is the end of, well, turn 1, beginning of turn 2. So for the Soviets, I quickly brought everybody into squelch Berlin, which may have not been a good idea because a lot of the forces that I moved forward are pretty thin to compare to the NATO forces that are coming up to counter them. So I think the play on the turn is just probably not go full hog on the first turn to get rid of Berlin, but have the reinforcements come up and kind of take out Berlin and have everybody stay on the front line and push forward. Compared to surrounding Berlin immediately. The Berlin garrison lost one, but the Soviets already lost 2 battles up around Hamburg, lost 3 steps, but this lost 1 step due to retreating, but the loss rolls are kind of interesting, as you might get a high 4-1 and nothing, no losses for the defender, and they just retreat away. Very interesting on that. And compared to the 45 ones, everybody is mechanized, so exploiting turns and overruns are always an option. And that's why everybody's running around kind of doubling up so they can make a better option for overruns of units kind of sitting out by themselves. So this is the beginning of turn 3. Berlin is holding out. No losses there. Losses on Warsaw Pact. Fighting in the center here. Groups taking losses. Especially here in the center. And over here, kind of on the north front, stabilized. Down here, stabilized a little bit here. Some attacks. Mostly be due to poor rolls on both sides. So loads of units being lost. The Air Force both sides took a major hit. But through reinforcements, the Western Allies have gained back some of their losses, but not with the Warsaw Pact. Air Force is pretty much hit. And the Western Allies Air Force did well. And with the air units is when you're doing strikes and you do take a hit on one stack, you immediately move. The air units can start hitting units next to each other according to their on top of each success. So if all the units are lined up next to each other, a strike package can be hitting loads of stacks and doing some damage, which happened here in the center, allowing the Western Allies to counterattack. But yeah, it's quite the hole here. But there's a significant force coming in for this turn for Warsaw Pact. So since the Western Allies are not taking anything, we can fall back to better terrain and get a shift better and kind of get ready and do a counter attacks when the Warsaw Pact comes through. Might be the best option, and hopefully West Berlin can hold out for another turn. But losses were comparable for both sides so far. A little more on the Western Warsaw Pact. But on to turn 3. So this is the end of turn 4, and West Berlin is holding out, which is the Warsaw Pact can't do their victory roll until that's taken, but they haven't really taken any of the northern part here. And then we have kind of some breakthroughs here, just kind of holding the line, fighting back. Losses to NATO has been pretty harsh. Getting rid of that glare. But I'm wondering is like how many units really to cover the south here, other than covering the approaches down here on the Rhine. I'm thinking just completely falling back little by little. So because the NATO is the Warsaw Pact has already just left the Hungarians there and pulled everything up to try to take out the center. Kind of whittle away, but coming through here, and the Air Force on both sides has pretty done some damage to the units, especially when they get in this clear area. It's only 4 to 6 for a hit, and then if you're strung in a line, you could just take out units as it goes along. And on to turn 5. So this is the beginning of turn 8, and Berlin still hasn't fallen. They've been rolling quite well. But this area is falling and pushing up. They took the island here, so for this victory condition they're pretty much going to have the ports, but they need to take Copenhagen as the final to get that one. Down here at the Ruhr, they have taken one city. Basically got it surrounded, but haven't got across the river. But this is kind of useless for that. Berlin still hasn't fallen, which is kind of crazy with only 2 more turns to finish the game out. But everything else pushing, kind of wondering with the objectives in this for the Western Allies to defend. It's almost like you can pocket everybody because the supply is kind of not there. Pocket up here, cover all these objectives, and just surround everybody here in the city and block the Rhine and basically give up the rest of West Germany and Austria to the Soviets, and then just have them grind away in front of trying to attack across. Instead of just sitting out here in this open plains and getting blasted by the Air Force, which probably doesn't help here, because that's pretty much open country, because Air Force strikes are hit 4 to 6 takes damage. And if you're concentrated, units can just chain on those units. So still defending on the border might be an idea. We shall see. This is 62, which the units are a little weak because I had these guys held in reserve and their defenses are pretty low, and all the good units have been wiped out by now in defense. But basically, if they can hold out and not use nukes or chemical warfare, it might hold for a bit. So this is turn 9 beginning, and it's still crazy. The Berlin is holding out. That guy keeps rolling low and surviving. And he's in no retreat hexes, so can't retreat. So he's good. Outside the fact that pushing up into Denmark, now we got guys close enough to drop the paratroopers in. The NATO air forces have hit hard. There's going to be a counterattack there for units getting across the Rhine, pulling back out here. These units are getting surrounded and get attacked. Let's see how that goes. Kind of jumped the gun on turn 9 here. It's getting pretty close to the end, and NATO's surviving because Berlin is holding out. Kind of crazy. Oh, on 62, one of the reasons the Russians haven't used nukes is basically they have 3 nukes, 7 chemical warfare attacks. NATO has only 3 chemical warfare, but 15 nukes. So if they start nuking NATO, NATO can reply pretty heavily. And they don't gain the victory points on that. So this is kind of an interesting one for the Soviets, is that their nuclear and chemical warfare is pretty low. So the counterattacks here were quite good. The NATO wiped out that force across the Rhine, and this force was wiped out in the back, but one lone guy survived. But he's going to be good because he'll negate the river attack across the bridge for the other guys, so that's going to be nice. Well, that's the game. The Warsaw Pact got their 1 victory point. Reason for NATO collapse after taking Berlin. And they had to roll equal or less, and they rolled 1 on the final part of turn 9, and they win. NATO collapses.